Hey guys, tonight we are going to do something different. We are going to turn down the lights, not just in the room you are lying in, but in your mind. We are going to disconnect from the bright, sharp edges of the present day. I want you to let the noise of the modern world fade away. Let the hum of the electricity in the walls dissolve. Let the sound of the traffic outside the window retreat into the distance until it is nothing more than a memory.
Tonight, we are going back. We are drifting back to a time when silence was heavier, a time when darkness was absolute, a time when the world wasn't defined by the blue light of screens or the sterile scent of cleaning chemicals, but by the raw, organic, and overwhelming power of nature.
We are going back to the Middle Ages. But we aren't going there for the battles. We aren't going to stand on the walls and watch armies clash. We aren't going to sit in the throne room and listen to kings shout about taxes or wars. That is the history of noise. That is the history of action. And tonight, we are not looking for action. We are looking for stillness. We are looking for the atmosphere that lies underneath the history books. We are going to explore the air, the texture of the breath, the specific, undeniable reality of what it meant to be alive and breathing in a time when smelling like death wasn't a metaphor. It was just normal. I want you to get very comfortable. Adjust your pillows. Make sure your neck is supported. Pull the blanket up to your chin or push it down if you're too warm. Find that perfect temperature. Let your body sink into the mattress. Feel the weight of your limbs getting heavy. Your legs are heavy. Your arms are heavy. Your eyelids are heavy. Close your eyes. Imagine the clean, filtered, climate-controlled air of your bedroom is slowly dissolving. The scent of your laundry detergent, that artificial breeze or mountain spring scent, is fading away. We are drifting back to a time when the concept of deodorant was about as real as dragons. We are going to a time when people genuinely thought that touching water might kill them. It is going to get pretty grimy in our imagination tonight. The world we are entering is not polished. It is not sanitized. It is a world of mud and smoke and biology. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this in reality, not with your modern olfactory system intact. Your nose, trained on perfumes and soaps, would be overwhelmed. But here, in the safety of this story, you can drift through it like a ghost. You can observe, you can sense, but you cannot be harmed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to settle in. Dim the lights in your mind, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Breathe in, deeply, and breathe out. We begin by letting go of the visual. History is often painted in pictures, tapestries, stained glass, oil paintings. But pictures are static. They are distant. Smell is different. Smell is immediate. Smell is the only sense that travels directly to the emotional center of the brain. It bypasses logic. It hits you in the gut. And the Middle Ages, well, the Middle Ages was a period of knights, castles, and most importantly, an overwhelming, unrelenting, nose-searing stench. You are drifting now. You are leaving the 21st century behind. You are floating backward, past the Industrial Revolution with its coal smoke and oil, past the Victorian era with its smog, past the Renaissance with its heavy powders. You are settling gently,
like a leaf falling on still water, into the deep, muddy reality of the 14th century.
It is a time when the dirt wasn't just on you, it was part of you. Prepare yourself. The air is changing. The journey has begun. You begin by imagining the walk. You are a traveler. You have been walking for days, perhaps weeks. Your shoes are thin leather, and you can feel the uneven ground beneath your soles. You are approaching a town. It doesn't matter which one. It could be London, Paris, Cologne, or Florence. In this era, the sensory signature of a city is universal. It is late afternoon. The sun is dipping below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the fields. The air here, in the open countryside, smells of wet grass, turned earth, and the faint, sweet scent of wildflowers that are closing up for the night. It is a heavy, natural smell. It is peaceful. But as you walk closer to the city gates, the wind shifts. You are still a mile away. You cannot hear the voices yet. You cannot see the details of the people, but you know you are close. Why? Because the air tells you. You begin to imagine the first thing to hit you as you walk into a medieval town. Not the sight of towering stone walls or knights clanking down the street. Not the sound of bells. It is the smell. Your nose wrinkles involuntarily. It is a physical sensation, a thickness in the air that you can almost taste on the back of your tongue. It starts as a faint undercurrent, a sourness, like milk that has been left out in the sun. Then it grows. It becomes sharper, more complex. It is not one smell, not really. It is a horrible symphony. Let's break down the notes of this symphony piece by piece as you get closer to the walls. The bass note is wood smoke. Thousands of fires are burning inside those walls. Every home has a hearth. Every blacksmith has a forge. The smoke hangs low over the rooftops, trapped by the cooling air of the evening. It smells of charred oak, peat, and ash. It coats your throat. Above that heavy bass note, you smell the animals. Imagine the scent of wet wool, sheep, goats, horses. Thousands of animals are packed into this confined space. You smell their sweat. You smell the horse manure that has been ground into the dust of the road for centuries. And then the sharpest notes, the human element. Rotting meat. Maybe a butcher has thrown scraps into the gutter. Decaying vegetables, cabbage leaves and turnips that have turned to black slime in the alleyways. And the unmistakable, stinging tang of urine baking in the sun. The odor clings like a second skin, and you aren't even through the city gates yet. You pause at the entrance. The wooden gates are heavy, iron-bound, and open. The wood is old, darkened by rain and soot. Guards stand there, leaning on spears. They look tired. They are breathing this air, but they don't react. To them, this is just Tuesday. To them, this is just what the world smells like. They are nose blind. But you are new here. You stop. You take a moment to prepare yourself. You look up at the stone walls. They are stained with smoke. Moss grows in the cracks. Even the stones seem to be absorbing the scent of the city. You step through the archway. The light changes instantly. It is darker here, in the shadow of the buildings. The air is still. There is no breeze to carry the stench away. The medieval city is like a bowl, trapping everything inside. The upper stories of the houses lean in toward each other. They are built of timber and plaster. They overhang the street, darkening the path below, and trapping smells like a giant wooden lung with no exhale. You take a shallow breath. You try to breathe through your mouth, but the taste is there. Damp straw, old mud, the familiar bouquet of village life. It is a shock to the system, but as you keep walking, you start to notice the details. The city is alive. It is bustling. People are moving past you, weaving through the twilight. A merchant pulling a handcart. A monk in a brown habit, his head bowed, his sandals slapping against the dirt. A group of children playing, running right through a puddle that you would do anything to avoid. They are all living in this atmosphere. They are breathing it in, deeply, every second of every day. And tonight, you are walking among them. You are a ghost in their pungent world. Look down, look at your feet. In the modern world, we are disconnected from the ground. We walk on pavement. We walk on concrete, asphalt, tile, surfaces that are hard, sealed, and washed away by the rain, surfaces that are sterile. But here, the street is alive. The streets themselves were often made of compressed dirt and straw soaked in refuse. It is a soft, uneven surface. It is a geological layer of history, but a history made of debris. The street is not just wet, it is a quagmire, a thick, sucking mud that pulls at your shoes. And your shoes, they aren't the thick rubber soles of today that protect you from the elements. They are usually leather flats with thin soles. You feel everything squishing underfoot, every stone, every twig, every pocket of soft, questionable mud. You can feel the temperature of the ground through the leather. You can feel the moisture seeping in, dampening your socks, if you are wearing any. The real medieval experience was basically a daily fear factor challenge. You have to understand the waste management situation, or rather, the lack of it. Waste management didn't exist. There were no garbage trucks rumbling through at dawn with flashing lights. There were no plastic bins on the curb. There was no underground sewer system whisking things away to a treatment plant. So, where did it all go? People threw their sewage, yes, raw human waste, directly into the streets. That is not just some myth for drama's sake. It was the only way to get rid of it. Imagine walking down a narrow alley. The buildings are so close you could touch both sides if you stretched out your arms. Above you, the wooden shutters are closed against the night air. But suddenly, one creaks open. You freeze. You know what is coming. You might hear a shout from the upper window, a voice yelling, "Gardez-vous!" It is a corruption of the French phrase, "Regardez l'eau," watch out for the water. But it wasn't just water. Moments later, a bucket of, you know what, would be dumped straight into the alley. A heavy splash hits the ground a few feet in front of you. Brown liquid splatters against the wall. It soaks into the straw. If you were unlucky enough to be walking by, congratulations, you are now part of the ecosystem. And it gets even more delightful when you think about the summer. Imagine the sun beating down on these makeshift paths for 12 hours a day. The heat warming up layers of decomposing filth. It created a kind of low-grade biological weapon. The smell rising from the street would be visible like heat shimmer on a highway. And it wasn't just human waste, it was everything. The dirt wasn't just on you, It was part of you. And let's not forget the animals. Chickens are underfoot, pecking at the mud. Pigs waddle through alleys, rooting through the trash. Oxen leave fresh gifts on every corner. Butchers dump piles of offal, animal guts, bones, hooves, right outside their shops. Blood runs in little rivulets toward the center of the road, where it mingles with slop and rainwater and forms what might generously be called a puddle. The street is a barnyard. It is a sewer. It is a walkway, all in one. You step carefully. You learn to hug the walls. You learn to scan the ground for dry patches, hopping from stone to stone like a grim game of hopscotch. And as you walk, the smell rises up to meet you. It wraps around your ankles. It clings to your clothes like smoke from a fire. You are navigating the Grope Lane or Shambles Street. Real names, by the way. Names that tell you exactly what to expect. You breathe through your mouth, trying not to step in anything too warm, and remind yourself that this was home for millions of people over hundreds of years. By the time you get back to your front door, your once clean self is already tainted. Mud spatters your hem. Your boots are damp with mystery. But there is no escaping it. This is just how life smells. Let's step out of the mud for a moment. Let's wipe our feet, or try to, and duck our heads to enter a home. But you are not in your bed. You're not surrounded by high thread count cotton or memory foam. You are waking up in a modest medieval home. It is early morning. The sun is just a suggestion on the horizon, a pale gray light bleeding through the cracks in the wooden shutters. There is no glass in the windows, just wood. And when that wood is closed, the room is sealed tight. The air inside is thick. It has a weight to it. It is not empty air. It is occupied air. It is heavy with the smells of unwashed bodies. Not just one body, but a whole family. Privacy is a modern invention. Here, everyone sleeps together for warmth. You breathe the same air. You share the same scent profile. But it's not just humans. Look into the shadows of the room. In the winter, the animals are brought inside. A goat might be sleeping in the corner, chewing cud. A few chickens might be roosting near the rafters, shifting their feathers, sending a fine dust down onto the floor. A pig might be rooting under the table. It is warm, yes, but clean? No. The smell is a blend of damp straw, last night's stew, and something vaguely mildewy. It is the smell of a space that never truly airs out. You are lying on a mattress. Let's talk about that mattress. It is essentially a sack, a rough linen sack stuffed with straw, or maybe dried moss if you live near the woods. Every time you move, it rustles, it crunches, and it smells. It smells of dry grass that has slowly absorbed the moisture of the room over months. It smells of old dust. You sit up. You rub your eyes. Your skin feels gritty. There is a film on your face, a mixture of soot from the fire and your own natural oils. You haven't bathed in, well, you can't remember when. In the modern world, your morning routine involves a shower, hot water, soap, shampoo, deodorant, toothpaste, a dozen chemicals designed to strip away your humanity and replace it with the scent of ocean breeze. Here, your routine is different. It is drier. You stand up on the floor. Look at the floor. It is dirt, packed hard, almost like concrete, but it is earth. It is covered in rushes, dried plants or straw, scattered to soak up the dampness and the spills. These rushes aren't changed often. When they get too dirty or start to rot or attract too many insects, people don't always sweep them out. They just scoop up the top layer, push the rest to the side, and throw some fresh straw over it. It is a geological layering of domestic filth, a history of spilled ale, dropped food, and mud tracked in from the street, all fermenting quietly under your feet. You walk to the window. You push open the wooden shutter. Creak. You breathe in a waft of whatever the neighbors tossed out their window that morning. It might be wood smoke, it might be manure. It is the morning breath of the city. And now, the most critical part of the morning ritual. Your own chamber pot needs emptying. It's your turn. You pick up the ceramic or wooden bowl from under the bed. It has been sitting there all night, simmering in the warm room. The smell is sharp, ammoniac, and eye-watering. You carry it past the fire where breakfast porridge is bubbling. The porridge is gray and thick. It probably has insects in it. You step to the door or the window. You take a breath, and you engage in the medieval alarm clock ritual. You shout, "Gardiloo! Watch out for the water!" You hurl the contents into the alley. A goat bleats in the distance. Someone yells. Maybe you hit the target. Maybe you just added to the general misery of the street. The smell hits you again, a fresh wave of pungent biology rising from the cobblestones, and you shrug. It's just another day in the most pungent era in human history. You don't feel dirty. You just feel normal. This is the baseline of existence. To be human is to smell like smoke and wool and animals. You might splash a little water on your face and hands before you eat, but that is it. Just a splash. Cold water from a bucket. You dry your face with a rough linen cloth. Your skin is tough. Your hands are calloused. You are ready for the day. You are ready to step out into a world where the very concept of clean meant something entirely different than it does to you or me. Now, you might be asking yourself a very modern question. You're standing there in the cottage, smelling of smoke and sleep. There is a well outside. There is a river nearby. Why not just take a bath? You probably think baths are a basic human right, maybe even a daily ritual. A hot soak with bubbles, candles, maybe a little music. But in the Middle Ages, bathing was something you did so rarely it had to be marked on the calendar. And even then, only if it didn't raise eyebrows. You want to clean yourself? Great, but not too often, or people start wondering what you've been up to. Bathing wasn't just scarce, it was straight up controversial. We need to slow down and understand the mindset here. We need to look at the science of the time. In the 13th and 14th centuries, people had begun to see water as more of a threat than a blessing. The logic was weird to us, but to them, it was life and death. It went like this. Your body was a fortress. It was a balance of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was about keeping these things inside, sealed up tight. They believed that hot water had a physical effect on the skin. They believed it softened the skin. It made the flesh weak. And most importantly, they believed it opened the pores. Now, to us, opening pores sounds like a good thing, a deep cleanse, a facial. But to a medieval person, an open pore was a hole in the fortress walls. Opening your skin's pores through hot water made you vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what?
To miasma. To the bad air. They believed that disease floated through the air in invisible, corrupted vapors. Plague, fever, sickness. It was all just drifting around, looking for a way in. If you sat in a hot bath, your pores would open up, and that deadly air, that invisible poison, would seep right into your body. Water didn't cleanse, it exposed. In a world where plague and bad air were considered legitimate causes of death, getting into a hot tub sounded like a hard pass. So most folks opted out. They believed that a layer of dirt, sweat, and oil was actually protective. It was a shield. Think of it like a sealant. You were basically wearing nature's hazmat suit. Removing that dirt was like stripping off your armor before walking onto a battlefield. It was like opening your front door to the plague, wearing nothing but a smile and optimism. So, when you see a medieval peasant with grime on their neck and dirt under their fingernails, know that they aren't just being lazy. They are being safe. They are surviving. They believed it was better not to open your pores too often. Just keep that dirt sealed in. Thank you very much. And the doctors of the time agreed. Physicians actually warned against water. They feared it would weaken you. Instead, they recommended a dry cleaning method. Linen. They recommended wearing linen shifts, undergarments worn close to the skin. The theory was that the linen would rub against your skin. It would act like a wick. It would absorb the sweat, the oil, and the bodily impurities. It was a human paper towel system. If you changed your shirt, you were clean. That was the logic. If you had a fresh white linen shift, you didn't need water. The linen did the washing for you. Of course, this only worked if you had enough money to own multiple shirts and pay someone to wash them. For most people, the absorbent shirt just became another layer of filth. So the fear of water wasn't a phobia. It was a medical precaution. It was a survival strategy in a world that didn't understand bacteria, but was terrified of the air itself. Imagine living with that fear. Looking at a river or a tub of hot water and seeing not comfort, but danger, seeing a trap. So you stay dry, you stay dusty, and you stay alive. Let's leave the dry, dusty interior of the cottage for a moment. We are walking down toward the water. There was one exception to the medieval rule of staying dry. One moment where contact with water was unavoidable. Laundry day. In the Middle Ages, washing clothes wasn't a weekly chore. It wasn't a relaxing Saturday ritual where you toss a pod in a machine and catch up on your reading. It was a physical, punishing ordeal. People avoided it as long as human dignity allowed. Your shirt, your tunic, you wore it until it begged for death. Imagine your daily outfit. It is made of wool or linen. It is thick, coarse, heavy. It is not exactly breathable. By midday, it is soaked in sweat. By nightfall, it has taken on the scent of fire smoke, onions, animal grease, and whatever your neighbor dumped in the street that morning. And yet, it is still your best tunic. You sleep in it, you work in it, you might even be buried in it. But eventually, the dirt becomes too much. Eventually, the lice need to be drowned. So you go to the river. Imagine standing by the riverbank. It is early morning. The air is biting cold. You are not alone. This is a communal space.
You watched the women, and it was almost always women, kneeling in the mud. They are the laundresses. Their hands are raw, red, swollen from the freezing water. They drag heavy, soaking wet bundles of fabric out of the river. The wool is heavy as lead when it's wet.
They don't have Tide. They don't have fabric softener.
They have lye. They scrub the clothes with ash or lye.
Lye is a harsh, caustic solution made from wood ash and animal fat. It isn't the gentle lavender-scented detergent, you know. It smells sharp, acrid, bitter. It smells like a chemical burn. It dissolves stains, sure, but it might dissolve your fingertips if you aren't careful. The sound of the riverbank is the rhythmic slapping of wet cloth against stone. Thwack, thwack, thwack. They beat the fabric against rocks or heavy wooden paddles, trying to convince the dirt and sweat to let go. It often doesn't. And once the washing is done, the struggle isn't over. Drying is a nightmare. If it's sunny, you lay the clothes on the grass or hang them on bushes, but birds might drop things on them. More often, in the damp climate of Europe, drying had to be done indoors. You drag the wet, heavy clothes back to the cottage. You drape them over smoky rafters, or you lay them near the hearth. So now your clean clothes are being smoked like a ham. The steam rises from the wool, filling the small room with humidity and the smell of wet dog. The fire bakes the sweat back in, mixing it with the wood ash. So yes, the clothes were technically cleaner, but they smelled like someone barbecued a goat while wearing them. And there was shrinkage. Wool that isn't treated warps. You wash your tunic once, and suddenly it clings to you like a sausage casing. Or it droops in strange places like a wizard's robe. Buttons pop off. Seams pull. This is why people avoided it. This is why they brushed off the visible dirt with a stick and carried on like nothing happened. It was easier to live with the smell of the past few weeks than to face the freezing river and the burning lye. You watch the steam rising from a drying shirt. You smell the chemical tang of the ash soap. And you realize that even cleanliness in this era came with a heavy, pungent cost. The chamber pot ritual. Visuals. High-angle shot looking down a narrow, crooked cobblestone alleyway. The walls are tall and shadowed. A wooden bucket sits precariously on a window ledge. The camera slowly zooms in on the liquid in the bucket, catching a reflection of the gray sky. A cat walks gingerly along the edge of the street below, avoiding the center. Now, let's talk about the most dangerous walk you can take in a medieval city. We have talked about the mud beneath your feet. Now we must look up. We need to talk about the delivery system, the vertical threat. In a modern home, sanitation is a silent miracle. You press a lever, water rushes, and everything you wish to forget is whisked away to a treatment plant miles from your mind. It is gleaming white porcelain and silence. In the Middle Ages, there were no underground sewers neatly tucked away beneath the pavement. There were no pipes humming in the walls. If you had to go in the middle of the night, you didn't walk down the hall to a tiled room. You reached under the bed. You reached for the chamber pot. It was a simple object, a ceramic bowl, or perhaps a wooden bucket. It lived under your bed or in a quiet corner of the room. And it stayed there all night. Imagine the atmosphere of a small, closed bedroom. The windows are shuttered against the cold.
the fire has died down to embers, and beneath the bed, this pot sits, simmering, releasing its sharp ammoniac scent into the unventilated room. But eventually, the pot gets full, and in the morning, where does it go? There is no flush. There is only the window. There was a technique to this disposal, a daily ritual that defined the rhythm of the city street. You stand at the window. You push the shutters open. You pick up the heavy pot. You look down into the narrow alley. In theory, according to the laws of some cities, you're supposed to check if anyone is walking there. You are supposed to offer a warning. Gardez-le! It comes from the French, regardez-le, watch out for the water. But let's be honest, it wasn't just water. And not everyone shouted. Some mumbled it, some shouted it as they were pouring, which, according to the laws of physics, is too late to be helpful. Some just didn't care. So, for you, walking down on the street level, the city was a high-stakes gamble. People learned to walk defensively. They hugged the walls. They scurried quickly through alleys, keeping one eye looking up at the eaves of the houses. Imagine this moment in slow motion. You are walking home. You are wearing a hooded cloak because it is raining slightly. The air is damp. As you pass beneath an upstairs window, you hear a creak. A splash hits your shoulder. It is heavier than rain. It is warmer than rain. You freeze. You know exactly what just happened. But you don't scream. You don't even look up. You just keep walking, pulling your cloak tighter, trying to convince yourself it was just dirty rainwater from the roof. Maybe it was, probably it wasn't. You will never know, and you'll smell it for the rest of the day. And it wasn't just liquid, everything went out the window. Spoiled food, dirty dishwater, rushes from the floor that had rotted, ashes from the hearth, blood from slaughtered animals. The alleyway was a canyon of refuse, a vertical delivery system for filth. Some wealthier homes had garderobes, little wooden seats built into the outer walls that opened directly over the street or a pit. But in the crowded cities, the window was the primary exit strategy. This created a smell that was layered. It wasn't just a flat odor. It was a three-dimensional fog that moved with the wind. If you lived on the ground floor, your view was the fallout zone. Your front stoop was the neighborhood's unofficial dumping ground. And yet, people navigated this. They walked through it to buy bread. Children played hopscotch in these streets. The smell was a signal. It told you where you were. It warned you of nasty intersections. Your nose guided you like a GPS. You step carefully around a puddle that looks too dark to be water. You breathe shallowly. And you realize that in the medieval city, the sky wasn't always safe. Danger didn't just come from thieves or plagues. It came from the neighbors upstairs shouting "Gardez-le" into the morning mist. Now, let's step out of the filthy alley. We are going to find a refuge, a place that seems impossible in this story of dirt. We are going to find steam. You might be surprised to find this here. We talked about the fear of water. We talked about the dry cleaning method. But there was a time, and there were places, where people gathered to soak. Welcome to the stews. In Middle English, stew was slang for a bathhouse.
and stepping into one was a full sensory experience that contradicted everything outside the door.
You push open a heavy wooden door. You are immediately hit by a wall of humidity. It is the humid breath of boiling water. The air here smells different. It doesn't smell of the street. It smells of rosemary. It smells of lavender. Herbs floating in the steam, trying to mask the human stew underneath. You can barely see across the room through the fog. The windows are small and clouded with condensation. You hear the sound of water splashing, the murmuring of voices, laughter. This isn't a solitary clinical wash. This is a social event. People are sitting in large wooden tubs, sometimes 2 or 3 people to a tub. In the early Middle Ages, men and women bathed together. It was casual. It was communal. And they are eaten. You are sitting in warm water. You are naked or wearing a thin linen cloth. And you are sipping wine. You are snacking on roast chicken. Servants bring trays of food right to the tub. You eat while half-naked strangers float past. It sounds like a spa mixed with a medieval food court. Attendants move through the steam. They might scrub your back with a rough cloth. They might massage oil into your scalp to kill the lice. They use soap made from animal fat and ash, maybe mixed with herbs to hide the smell. For a brief, glorious moment, you feel the grime of the week sliding off your skin. You feel the heat loosening your joints. You remember what it is like not to itch, not to feel like your skin is made of barn dust and goat oil. But there is an undercurrent here, a tension. The church frowned upon the stews. They saw naked bodies. They saw warm water. They saw wine. And they saw sin. Bathhouses became hotspots for gossip, for gambling, and for things much more intimate. They were often associated with prostitution. If you visited the bathhouse too often, people started asking questions. Were you there for the soap, or were you there for something steamier? And then the ultimate mood killer arrived. The Black Death. The plague changed everything. Suddenly, this warm, humid room didn't look like luxury. It looked like a petri dish. People looked at the communal water. They looked at the soup of germs. They thought about their open pores. And they panicked. Wait, they thought, are we all just sharing germs and soup water? The authorities shut them down. In London, the famous stews of Southwark were officially shut down in 1546 by King Henry VIII. Not just for disease, but because of their unrepentant sinfulness. So, imagine you are standing in one of the last bathhouses. The candles are flickering low. The owner looks nervous. A priest is banging on the door. You dry off with a towel that smells like old stew. You step out into the cold street. The warmth fades instantly. You smell like soap and fear. You walk away knowing that this refuge is disappearing. The era of the public bath is ending, and the era of the dry, unwashed body is taking over completely. Hygiene was becoming a luxury of the bold and the heretical. Enjoy your dry pits while they last. Let's narrow our focus now. We've smelled the streets. We've smelled the steam of the bath. Now we need to get personal, intimate. Let's talk about the mouth. If eyes are the window to the soul, then in the Middle Ages, mouths were the open sewer grates of the face. If you think the streets were rough,
Just wait until you get a whiff of medieval breath. Dental hygiene in this era was a strange cocktail of superstition, desperation, and sheer neglect. There were no toothbrushes, no minty paste, no waxed floss. So how did they clean their teeth? If you wanted to freshen up, you might chew on a twig. Literally, a twig. People used branches from certain trees, like the neem or miswak tree. These woods have natural antibacterial properties. You would gnaw on one end until the wood fibers frayed out, turning into a little brush. Then you would rub your teeth with it. It was surprisingly effective in some ways, but it was still miles away from modern dental care. Others tried rougher methods. They rubbed ashes, salt, or crushed herbs directly onto their teeth with a rough cloth. It sounds promising until you realize that rubbing ash on your teeth is like taking sandpaper to them. It scrubbed away the plaque, sure, but it also ground away the enamel. And the food didn't help. Bread was a staple, but it was stone ground. That meant tiny bits of the millstone, actual rock grit, ended up in the flour. Every bite of bread was a dental sandblaster. So, teeth wore down, they cracked, and then they rotted. By the time someone reached their late 20s or 30s, they were often missing a few. Blackened molars, crumbling incisors, inflamed gums. It was basically a dental horror film playing in slow motion inside every mouth. And cavities? They weren't treated, they were endured. If a tooth hurt badly enough, you didn't get a filling, you got it yanked. And not by a dentist. There were no dentists yet. You went to the barber. Imagine sitting in a wooden chair. The barber surgeon stands over you. He is holding a pair of iron tongs. Maybe they are rusty. Maybe he just used them to trim a horse's hoof. There is no anesthetic, no numbing shot. You just gripped the arms of the chair. You screamed into a cloth, and you hoped you didn't faint from the pain. But what really haunts you is the breath. Medieval breath was the kind of thing that could peel paint off a monastery wall. It was a mix of rotten food caught between teeth, gum disease, and the stomach issues caused by a diet of onions and ale. Some folks tried to fix it. They used mouthwashes made of wine and herbs. One recipe involved boiling sage in vinegar and rinsing your mouth with it. Imagine that taste. Hot herbal vinegar swishing around your rotten teeth. And then there were the mouth charms. Little spells people recited while holding herbs, hoping to drive away the pain and the smell. It was like medieval aromatherapy meets desperate superstition. Kissing in medieval Europe wasn't the romantic, fresh mint experience of the movies. It was a full sensory experience in the worst possible way. You lean in and you are greeted by a wave of mead, old meat, and visible tartar buildup. That's not sparks flying. That's your soul leaving your body. But just like the city streets, people got used to it. Your nose went blind. Unless someone's breath was truly knock a monk out offensive, you didn't mention it. You were too busy worrying about not dying from an infected wound or a crop failure to care if your neighbor's teeth smelled like fermented goat stew. You chew a sprig of parsley. You rinse with bitter herbs. And you hope that the ache in your back molar doesn't get any worse. Because honestly, what's the point? You've got bigger things to worry about. We have smelled the exterior of the medieval human. The unwashed wool, the wood smoke, the mud. But the smell didn't just come from the outside, it came from the inside. Let's talk about the belly. Let's talk about the engine of the body. Because what you eat becomes what you smell like. And the medieval diet was a recipe for a very specific kind of aromatic existence. If you are a regular villager, your diet is simple. It is monotonous. It consists of whatever you can grow, steal, trade, or beg. Mostly, that means bread. Not the soft, white sliced bread in a plastic bag. We are talking about barley bread, rye bread, oat bread. It is hard. It is dense. It sits heavy in the stomach. It has chunks of ground-up husk in it. It smells of sour yeast and hard labor. And then there are the vegetables. Medieval Europeans didn't go for delicate salads. They loved the pungent stuff, the root vegetables that grew deep in the cold earth. Onions, garlic, leeks. These were cheap, they were easy to grow, and they were flavorful in that eye-watering, breath-destroying way. They boiled these vegetables until they resembled soggy fabric. They tossed them into a pot to make pottage. Pottage was an edible swamp, a thick brown stew made from whatever grains and legumes hadn't gone moldy yet. So now, imagine your internal chemistry. You have a gut full of hard bread, boiled cabbage, onions, and beans. Your body predictably does not appreciate this mixture. Gas was common, like extremely common. People walked around farting constantly, and no one even flinched. If someone lifts a leg to one side while having a casual conversation about the harvest, that's just daily life. It was the background noise and smell of the village. You just made sure to step upwind. But here is the kicker. To wash down this heavy gas-inducing meal, you didn't drink water. Remember the fear of water? That applied to drinking too. With no reliable filtration, rivers and wells were often contaminated. So, you drank ale. Beer, low alcohol, cheap, and boiled during brewing, so it was safer than water. You drank it from sun up to sundown, for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. It fills your belly. It blurs your mind slightly. But it also adds a yeasty, fermented funk to your sweat. Think about the chemistry. You are sweating out the byproducts of garlic, onions, and fermented grain. Your body odor isn't just human musk. It is fermented peasant stew served hot and fresh through your skin. And if you were a noble, you might think it was better. Nobles ate more meat, but without refrigeration, meat was often aged. If a deer or a pig had been hanging a little too long, you didn't throw it out, you covered it in spices. Cloves, cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg, saffron. They drowned the taste of spoilage in expensive powder. So a noble's breath smelled like rotting meat masked by a spice cabinet. And sugar. The rich loved sugar. They ate candied fruits and sugary pastries. This rotted their teeth even faster than the peasants. So you have this ecosystem of digestion, a population of people with bloating, gas, and breath that smelled of pickled turnips, ale, and decay. You finish your meal, you wipe your mouth with the back of your sleeve, the same sleeve you haven't washed in weeks. You belch. No one looks up. It is expected. You take a swig of ale. You sit back, adding your own personal scent to the chorus of the room. And you realize that in the Middle Ages, you didn't just occupy space, you permeated it. Let's leave the village behind for a moment. Let's walk up the muddy hill toward the stone towers that scrape the sky. You probably have an image in your mind of a medieval castle. You see it in movies, roaring fires, bright banners, feasting nobles, elegance. But let's strip away the Hollywood filter. Let's walk inside with our senses wide open. To live in a castle in the Middle Ages was to live in a magnificent, fortified refrigerator. You step through the main doors. The first thing you notice is the temperature. It drops. Stone is excellent at keeping things cold. In the summer, it's nice. In the winter, the walls radiate a chill that settles deep in your bones. But more than the cold, you notice the dampness. These walls sweat. Moisture from the air, from the rain outside, seeps into the limestone. It condenses on the cold surface. It creates a smell that is earthy, mineral, and thick. It smells like a wet cave. And because it is damp, things grow. Look at the corners of the room. Look behind the heavy velvet tapestries that line the walls. Mold. Mildew thrives here. It creeps up the stone, adding a musty, sour undercurrent to the air. The tapestries aren't just for decoration. They are insulation. They are trying to keep the heat in, but they also trap the dust and the smell. Now, walk toward the center of the great hall. There is a fire burning. It is massive. Logs the size of trees are smoldering. But look up. There is no chimney, at least not a modern one with a good draft. In many early castles, the smoke simply rose to the ceiling and tried to find its way out through a small hole or louvers in the roof. It didn't always make it. So the upper half of the room is filled with a haze of wood smoke. It hangs there, stinging your eyes, coating your throat. The air smells of charred wood, ash, and, if you sniff closely, charred rat droppings. Because yes, the rafters are full of life too. And the floor? It isn't polished marble. It is often stone or packed earth covered in rushes, just like the peasant cottages. But here, the rushes are changed even less frequently because the room is so big. Beneath the straw lies a history of the castle's social life. Bones from dinner thrown to the dogs, spilled wine, ale, grease dripping from the table. Dogs circle underfoot, licking up drips of stew. It all settles into the floor, fermenting quietly in the shadows. So while the nobles sitting at the high table might be wearing silk and gold, they are breathing in an atmosphere that is a blend of wet stone, old smoke, and decaying food. It is grand, yes, but it is also stifling. The stone walls trap heat, smoke, and body odor like a Dutch oven of nobility. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. You realize that wealth in the Middle Ages didn't buy you comfort. It just bought you a larger, colder, and slightly more expensive kind of stink. Now, we must address the most infamous architectural feature of the castle, the luxury that separated the lords from the commoners. The toilet. But they didn't call it a toilet, they called it the garderobe. The name sounds fancy, doesn't it? Like a wardrobe, a place to store your robes. And we will get to that irony in a moment. But first, the reality. You are walking down a drafty stone corridor. You open a small wooden door.
You step into a closet-sized room built into the thickness of the outer wall. There is a stone or wooden bench, and in the center of the bench there is a hole. There is no water in the bowl, no handle to flush, no gleaming white porcelain. If you lean over and look down, which I don't recommend, you see a long, dark shaft that drops straight down the side of the castle. And at the bottom, the moat. Yes, the romantic, shimmering moat that surrounds the castle, the water that reflects the moonlight. It was also the castle's septic tank. It was an open-air cesspool complete with floating refuse and the occasional bloated fish. The wind, swirling around the castle towers, would often catch the updraft from the shaft. So, as you sit there on the cold stone bench, a gust of wind might blow the scent of the moat right back up into the room. A warm, composting breeze of ammonia and decay. It bounced off the stone walls like a pinball of regret. And here is the strangest part, the detail that truly defines the medieval mindset. You look around the small, smelly room and you see clothes hanging on pegs. Beautiful velvet gowns, silk tunics, fur-lined cloaks. Why? Why would anyone hang their finest clothes inside the toilet? Because of the moths. In the Middle Ages, clothes were expensive. Fabrics like wool and fur were prone to being eaten by insects. But people noticed something. Moths hate the smell of ammonia. They hate the smell of urine. So, the garderobe became a dual-purpose room. It was a bathroom, and it was a moth-proof closet. The heavy fumes rising from the pit coated the clothes. It killed the bugs. So, imagine a noble lady getting dressed for a feast. She sends her servant to fetch her favorite gown. The servant brings it back from the garderobe. The lady puts it on. She looks stunning. She is dripping in jewels. But as she walks past you, you catch a whiff. Beneath the perfume, beneath the rose water, her dress smells faintly, unmistakably of the toilet. And to her, that is the smell of preservation. It means her clothes are safe. You stand in the small stone room, listening to the wind howl down the shaft, and you realize that in this world, hygiene and stench were so twisted together, you couldn't have one without the other. You try not to breathe through your nose. You do what you came to do, and you leave quickly, your boots squelching on the damp flagstones. So, the castle smells of smoke, mold, and the moat. The people inside smell of sweat, onions, and unwashed wool. How did the elite deal with this? How did the kings and queens, the dukes and duchesses, convince themselves they were superior to the muck outside? They didn't clean the dirt away. They declared war on the air. Welcome to the perfume wars of the medieval court. If you were rich, filthy rich, you didn't scrub the stench off your skin. You buried it. You used scent as a weapon. But the perfumes of the Middle Ages were not the light, airy floral sprays we use today. They were not delicate mists of jasmine and vanilla. They were heavy. They were dense. They were animalistic. They used substances that had staying power. Substances that could fight a cage match with body odor and win. Let's look at the ingredients list. Musk. This came from a gland of the musk deer. It is a pungent, earthy scent that clings to everything. Civet.
This was a secretion scraped from the glands near the backside of a civet cat. Ambergris, a waxy gray substance produced in the digestive system of sperm whales, essentially aged whale vomit that floats in the ocean until it hardens. These ingredients smelled earthy, musky, and incredibly potent. They were the smell of biology, refined into luxury. They mixed these heavy bases with strong spices, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, and suspended them in oil or animal fat. The result was a scent profile that was thick enough to chew on. They didn't just dab a little behind their ears, they saturated themselves. They rubbed these heavy oils into their hair, letting it soak into the unwashed strands. They soaked their leather gloves in rose water and musk until the leather itself reeked of flowers. They saturated their undergarments. Some men even added scented wax to their mustaches, so every breath they took was filtered through a wall of spice. The goal was to create a scent cloud. You wanted people to smell you before they saw you. It was a display of power. It said, "I am so rich, I can smell like a forest in India instead of a stable in England." Now, imagine a banquet. You are standing in the great hall. The windows are closed to keep out the drafts. The fire is smoking. The dogs are fighting over bones. And 50 nobles walk in. Each one is wearing a different, overpowering perfume. One smells like frankincense and cat musk. Another smells like roses and whale vomit. Another smells like pure cinnamon and sweat. And underneath all of that, the smell of bodies that haven't bathed in months. The smell of the garderobe lingering on their clothes. It all mixes together in the heat of the room. It creates a chaotic olfactory layering. It is a scent so confused and so strong that there are records of nobles actually fainting from the intensity of the competing odors. You are standing there, trying to breathe. It is dizzying. It smells like an erotic forest fire. This was elegance. This was high society. It wasn't about being clean. It was about being loud with your nose. It was about wrestling the stench of the world into submission with a stronger, more expensive stench. But what if you had to leave the safety of the perfumed court? What if you had to walk through the market, or pass a tannery, or visit a sick relative? You needed a shield. You needed a personal air filter. Enter the pomander. The medieval version of just spray more cologne was a small perforated ball, usually made of gold, silver, or carved wood. It hung from a chain on your belt or around your neck like a piece of jewelry. Inside the hollow ball was a mixture of aromatic substances: ambergris, musk, cloves, cinnamon, rose petals, all mashed into a paste with wax or resin. Think of it like a medieval AirPod case, but instead of holding earbuds, it held your last line of defense against the world. You are walking through a crowd now. The smell of the unwashed bodies pressing against you is intense. The smell of the open drain in the street is rising. You reach down. You lift the golden ball. You press it directly against your nostrils. You breathe in deep. For a second, the world disappears. You smell spice. You smell the East. You smell money. But this wasn't just about comfort. It was about survival. Remember the fear of miasma? The bad air? People believed that bad smells caused disease. If you smelled a rotting carcass, you weren't just disgusted, you were in danger. You were inhaling sickness. So the pomander was a medical device. If you could replace the bad smell with a good smell, you were safe. You were filtering out the plague. It was a magical thinking approach to virology. Smell something good, live another day. Smell something bad, and you might die. You see nobles walking through the streets looking like they are hiding behind their hands. They are clutching these little balls, sniffing them frantically every time a breeze blows from the wrong direction. It created a strange social dynamic. If you were talking to someone and their breath was terrible, which, as we established, it probably was, you could subtly raise your pomander to your nose. It was a polite way of saying, you smell like a peasant and I am protecting myself from your existence. It was a status symbol, a health charm, and a way to navigate a world that was constantly assaulting your senses. You hold your imaginary pomander now. You breathe in the scent of cloves and amber. It is a tiny island of safety in a sea of stench. We have masked the body odor. We have filtered the air. Now let's look at the face. Let's enter the boudoir of a high-born lady. If you think the hygiene was bad, wait until you see the makeup routine. Welcome to the era of toxic beauty. In the Middle Ages, the ideal standard of beauty was pale, ghostly pale. Why? Because a tan meant you worked outside. It meant you were a peasant laboring in the sun. To be pale meant you were rich. It meant you stayed indoors, in the dark, damp castle, doing absolutely nothing. So, how did they achieve this look? They didn't just stay out of the sun, they painted themselves. They used a substance called ceruse, or Venetian ceruse. It was a thick white paint. And the main ingredient? Lead. White lead. You are watching a lady apply this to her face. She smooths the thick, chalky paste over her skin. It covers her blemishes. It covers the smallpox scars. It makes her look like a porcelain doll. But underneath, the lead is seeping into her pores. Over time, it caused the skin to rot. It turned gray and shriveled. It caused sores. And what did they do when the sores appeared? They applied more lead paint to cover them up. It was a vicious cycle. A slow, beautiful suicide. And the smell? Many of these cosmetics were mixed with animal fats to make them spreadable. Goose grease, bear fat. So your foundation was essentially meat lotion. On a hot day, in a stuffy hall, under layers of velvet, that fat would start to warm up. It would start to turn rancid. Your face would smell like a kitchen grease trap. To distract from this, they applied rouge to their cheeks and lips. This was often made from cinnabar, which is mercury sulfide. So now you have lead on your cheeks and mercury on your lips. And let's not forget the hair. Blonde hair was prized. If you had dark hair, you wanted to lighten it. So you used a mixture of lye, that harsh soap ingredient, and urine. You soaked your hair in it and sat in the sun. The ammonia in the urine acted as a bleach. Imagine the smell of your hair baking in the heat, soaked in old urine and lye. And the hairline. High foreheads were fashionable. They made you look intelligent and noble. So women plucked their hairlines back. They tweezed the hair right off the front of their scalps to create an elongated egg-like shape.
They sometimes plucked their eyebrows off entirely. You look at the woman in the mirror. She looks like a well-dressed alien. Her face is stark white. Her forehead is massive. Her lips are red with poison. She smells of rancid grease, urine, and heavy musk perfume. She turns and smiles at you. Her teeth are black from sugar. Her breath smells of onions. And in the Middle Ages, this was the peak of desire. This was the most beautiful woman in the room. You step back from the vanity table. You are realizing that the glamour of the past was a facade, a mask painted over decay. We leave the castle now. We walk down the hill, away from the lead paint and the musk oil. We follow the sound of bells. Religion in the Middle Ages wasn't just a Sunday obligation. It was the atmosphere. It filled the air, quite literally. And just like the castle, holiness had a scent. You enter a monastery or a large cathedral. You step out of the noisy street and into the silence of God. You might expect it to smell clean, sterile, like a modern church that smells of lemon polish and old paper. But no. The first thing you notice is the air. It is heavy. It has a physical weight to it. It smells of damp stone. These buildings are old, even now. The stone absorbs the rain, the groundwater, and the breath of generations. And candle smoke. Beeswax candles are burning by the hundred. They fill the space with a warm, honeyed scent. But as they burn down, they release soot, a suffocating, waxy haze that clings to the ceiling. And underneath that, the smell of the congregation. Medieval people didn't bathe much, remember? Now imagine hundreds of them packed into a stone room with no ventilation for a 2-hour mass. There are no pews. People stand. They press together. The heat of their bodies rises. The air becomes a physical weight. This is why incense was so important. It wasn't just for spiritual vibes. It wasn't just to set the mood. It was divine deodorant. Priests swung those heavy metal censers, thump, clink, pumping thick clouds of frankincense, myrrh, and dried herbs into the aisles. They were trying to mask the BO with holy smoke. They believed the smoke carried prayers to heaven, but practically it stopped the congregation from passing out. But there is a specific smell in the monastery that we need to talk about. The smell of the monks themselves. Monasteries were not spas. They were workhouses. Monks farmed, brewed ale, copied manuscripts, and fed the poor. And in many orders, cleanliness was considered vanity. Dirt was a sign of humility. A bit of crust in your hair was a sign of spiritual discipline. Imagine standing in the dormitory, rows of straw mattresses packed into a long, narrow room. The smell is a blend of sweat, unwashed feet, damp wool, and old books. Some monks wore the same wool habit for years without washing it. One famous monk supposedly bragged about not washing his feet for over 40 years. You can practically hear the lice applauding. And then there were the relics. Every church wanted a piece of a saint, a bone, a lock of hair, a finger, a piece of cloth soaked in holy blood. Pilgrims would travel miles to kiss these items. But here is the biological reality. Even holy material decays. Some of those relics were rotting in their display cases.
There were stories of the odor of sanctity, a sweet smell that saints were supposed to emit after death, smelling of roses or violets. But often, what pilgrims smelled when they pressed their faces against a glass coffin was less miracle and more slow decay. You stand in the shadows of the nave. You smell the incense warring with the mildew. You smell the unwashed wool of the monk praying next to you. It is a smell that commands reverence, but also a smell that reminds you constantly of mortality. Let's step back out into the light, into the noise, into the beating heart of the city, the market. If the streets were the arteries of the city, the market was the stomach, and the stomach was upset. This is the death-smelling engine room of the medieval city. There are no glass display cases here, no ice, no plastic wrap, no refrigeration trucks humming in the background. Everything is open. Everything is exposed to the elements. You walk past the butcher's stall. This isn't a clean counter. It is a slaughterhouse floor brought out into the street. Butchers hack through carcasses with axes. Blood pools beneath the tables, mixing with yesterday's grease and the sawdust. There are piles of offal, guts, bones, hooves, unwanted bits, heaped up waiting to be carted away. The smell is metallic, iron and fat. It hits the back of your throat and coats your tongue. Stray dogs patrol the area, snapping at scraps. And flies. Flies are everywhere. A constant low-grade buzzing sound that acts as the soundtrack to your shopping trip. They land on the meat. They land on you. Next to the butcher is the fishmonger. Inland cities had it rough. Fish had to be carted in barrels packed in salt. By the time it reached the market, it had been dead for days. The stalls are lined with slippery silver corpses laid out on wooden boards that have warped from years of soaking in brine and fish guts. You walk too close and splash, you get hit with fish water. Water that smells like it has already been digested. And then the produce. You think of a farmer's market as fresh and green, but here there are no standards for what can be sold. If an onion is sprouting, you sell it. If a cabbage has a few wormholes, you sell it. The smell of rotting vegetable matter, that sweet, sickly compost smell, drifts from the back of the carts. And cheese. Medieval cheese wasn't kept in a chiller. It sat out in the sun. Soft cheeses wrapped in cloth that oozed. It smelled of ammonia and sour milk. Some vendors added herbs to mask the ripeness, which is a polite way of saying the cheese was starting to move on its own. You are surrounded by food, but your appetite is gone. The air is thick with the scent of things that are just on the verge of turning. It is a race against time, and your nose knows that the rot is winning. You breathe through your mouth, buy your wilted turnips, and try to escape the aromatic symphony of the food chain. But if you think the market is bad, you haven't been to the outskirts. You haven't visited the district that everyone tried to ignore, but no one could escape. The tanneries. Leather was essential to medieval life. Shoes, belts, saddles, armor, scabbards. Everyone needed leather. But making it was a chemical nightmare. Tanneries were usually pushed to the edge of town, downstream, and for good reason. They were the most offensive places on earth. To turn a raw, stiff animal hide into soft, flexible leather,
You have to strip the hair and fat and then chemically treat it.
They didn't have modern chemicals. They had biology.
First, the hides were soaked in urine, vats of stale urine collected from the town. Then, they used lime to strip the hair. And finally, to soften the leather, they used the secret ingredient, dog dung. It was known as pure. There were people called pure finders who actually walked the streets collecting dog feces in buckets to sell to the tanners. Imagine the smell of a vat filled with hundreds of animal skins, soaking in a mixture of urine, lime, and dog feces, baking in the summer sun. You stand near the edge of Tanner's Lane and the smell hits you like a physical object. It is sharp, ammoniac. It burns your eyes. It clears your sinuses instantly and leaves you gasping for breath. It smells hot, even when the air is cold. The workers here are stained dye brown. They wade in the filth. They breathe it in every day. They probably can't smell anything anymore. Their noses have burned out. This is the smell of industry, the smell of necessity. You realize that that beautiful leather belt the noble is wearing, or the shoes on your feet, they started here. They started in the urine and lime pits of the damned. You turn around. You walk back toward the city center, preferring the smell of the open sewers to the chemical burn of the tannery. Because at least the sewers smell human. This smells like the earth itself is dissolving. You are feeling a bit faint from the chemical fumes of the tanneries. Your head is throbbing. Maybe that tooth we talked about earlier is starting to ache again. You need a doctor. But in the medieval city, you don't go to a pristine hospital with white corridors. You go to the barber. No, not the cheerful fellow with clippers and beard oil who talks about sports. This is the barber surgeon. He is a man who can trim your bangs, lance a boil, and amputate your leg all before lunch. He handles hair, he handles teeth, he handles blood. You approach the shop. The sign outside is the iconic striped pole. To you, it looks like a candy cane, but here the symbolism is literal. The red symbolizes blood. The white symbolizes the bandages used to staunch the flow, and the pole itself represents the wooden staff that patients gripped during bloodletting to keep their veins popping and their hands steady. It is a monument to pain. You step inside. The smell hits you immediately. It doesn't smell like eucalyptus or talcum powder. It smells of burnt hair. In this era, barbers didn't just cut hair. They often singed it to seal the ends or tame the frizz. They would apply a thick sludge of lard and rosemary to your hair and then run a hot iron near it. So the air is thick with the scent of scorching pig fat and singing keratin. Underneath that, there is the smell of sweat, nervous sweat, the sweat of people who are in pain, and coppery blood, fresh and metallic, and old cheese. Why cheese? Perhaps it is the barber's lunch. Perhaps it is the unwashed aprons. Or perhaps it is just the pervasive background note of the city seeping in. You take a seat in the wooden chair. You might be sitting in the same spot where someone just had a molar yanked out an hour ago. The leather armrests are stained and dark. You are here for a bleed. Bloodletting was the gold standard of medieval health. Feeling sluggish? Bleed. Headache? Bleed. Bad dreams? Bleed. Doctors and barbers believed that your body's humors, those fluids we mentioned earlier, needed balancing.
Too much blood meant chaos. The barber ties a tourniquet around your arm. He taps the vein. He picks up a small, sharp knife called a fleam. He hums a little tune. He discusses the weather patterns. And then, snip! The red fluid flows into a bowl. The smell of iron fills the small space. It is warm. It is intimate. Or perhaps he uses leeches. You look at the shelf. There is a clay pot or a glass jar. Inside, dark, ribbon-like creatures are swimming. If you are squeamish, look away. He takes a live leech. He attaches it to your skin. You watch it swell. It pulses as it feeds. It fills with your essence. When it is full, he pops it off and stores it back in a jar for future use. The barber claims it is therapeutic. You just try not to think about the little worm wriggling in the pot by the window. But the real horror begins when someone walks in holding their side. It is time for minor surgery. Maybe an infected abscess. Maybe an embedded arrowhead. The barber grabs his heavier tools, pliers, saws. There is no anesthesia, no antiseptic, just a good grip, a strong stomach, and someone nearby to hold the patient down. And afterward, cauterization. To stop the bleeding or kill the infection, they used a hot iron. The smell of searing flesh would fill the shop. It is a scent you never get used to. You finish your shave and your bleed. The barber wipes your arm with a cloth soaked in vinegar. The sharp, acidic scent of the vinegar wakes you up. It clears the copper smell from your nose. You drop a coin on the counter. You step back out into the street. You feel lighter, floatier, probably from the blood loss. You smell like vinegar, smoke, and hot iron. It isn't pleasant, but at least it isn't fish guts. In the great medieval stink scale, you are currently breaking even. Let's end this section of our journey on a happier note, or at least a louder one. A festival. The whole town gathers. It is May Day or a saint's feast. Work stops. There is music, the drone of bagpipes, the cranking of a hurdy-gurdy, drums beating a rhythm that you can feel in your chest. You walk into the square. It is packed, shoulder to shoulder. The smell is intense. It is the concentrated raw essence of medieval humanity. 1,000 people. They are wearing their one good tunic. But remember, they haven't washed it. They are sweating in the heat of the bonfire. You smell the wool. Have you ever smelled wet dog? Damp wool, especially wool that is still rich in natural lanolin and dirt, smells exactly like that. As the crowd presses in, the heat of their bodies warms up the wool. It releases a musky, animalistic scent. But there are good smells here too. A pig is roasting on a spit over the fire. The skin is crackling. The fat sizzles and drops into the coals. Hiss, sending up plumes of mouth-watering, savory smoke. There are pies, fried dough, honeyed almonds. It smells delicious until you realize the food has been sitting out for hours and the flies are doing their best to own a share of it. And then there is the ale. The beer tent is spilling over, literally. Barrels are tapped. People are jostling. Ale splashes onto the muddy ground. It smells of yeast. It smells of vinegar. It smells of old socks. And because there are no portable toilets, Where does everyone go? There are no bathrooms. If you need to relieve yourself, you find a wall, you find a bush, you find a ditch on the edge of the light. And later in the night, as the ale takes hold, people don't even make it that far. So the edges of the festival, the shadows beyond the firelight, smell of urine and vomit. It creates an ambient human funk that makes you wish your nose had a volume dial. Animals are part of the crowd too. Dogs fight over bones thrown from the feast. And horses. People rode here. Carts are parked nearby. The horses are tethered, and naturally they are leaving manure piles. People are dancing. They are spinning. They are stepping in the mud. They are stepping in the manure. There is a boy with the shovel trying to clear the worst of it, but he is mostly just smearing it around. And yet, look at their faces. They are smiling. They are laughing. They are shouting. They barely seem to notice the stench. They have dressed in their best. Some women wear garlands of rosemary or rose petals around their necks to smell nice. Men might have rubbed their hands with herbs. But mostly, they just accept it. You sit on a barrel, watching the sparks fly up into the night sky. The smoke gets in your hair. The smell of the crowd gets in your nose. It is overwhelming, absurd, and slightly fermented. This is the smell of community. In a world so close to death, where plague could strike tomorrow, the stink of the crowd was a sign that you were still here. You were still alive. You breathe in the smoke and the roast pork and the sweat, and for a moment, you don't mind it. Because this is the smell of life. We move now from the open air of the square to the most private, the most shadowed, and perhaps the most intense room in the medieval world. The birthing chamber. In the Middle Ages, bringing a baby into the world wasn't a sterile medical procedure. It was a gamble wrapped in blood, sweat, and screaming. And it had a very specific, unforgettable smell. Imagine a dimly lit room in a cottage or an upper floor of a merchant's house. The first thing you notice when you step inside is the heat. The room is stifling. The windows are shut tight, not just closed, sealed. Why? Because of the fear we talked about earlier. The fear of the air. They thought fresh air, especially a draft, could invite in evil spirits. Or worse, it could carry miasma that might harm the mother or the infant. So they sealed the room, they stuffed rags into the cracks of the shutters, they hung heavy blankets over the door. They created a capsule, a stagnant pocket of air. They let the sweat of the laboring mother, the breath of the midwives, the smell of the fire, and the fear stew in its own juices. The smell hits you before you even see the bed. It is hot. It is sour. It is earthy. It smells like old meat and panic. The birthing bed is usually just a straw mattress laid flat. It is covered in coarse linen sheets. But these aren't fresh sheets. They have likely been reused. They have been used by sisters, cousins, mothers. They are stained with the history of the family's survival. Around the bed, the air is thick with smoke. Someone is burning herbs, sage, juniper, perhaps frankincense if they can afford it. They aren't doing this for the aroma. They are doing it for spiritual warfare. They believe the smoke keeps demons away. They believe it purifies the air. But in reality, it just adds a layer of heaviness to the room. It stings the eyes. It coats the throat. It mixes with the metallic scent of the copper basin. And when the baby comes, the scent changes. It becomes sharp, iron, the smell of blood. There is no antiseptic here, no bleach, just wood soaked with years of smoke and moisture. The baby arrives. It is crying. It is purple. And here is the surprise. It is not washed. They believed bathing a newborn was risky. The baby's skin was seen as sacred, soft, and vulnerable. Cold water might shock it. Water might let the sickness in. So they didn't scrub the baby, they wiped it down, maybe with a dry cloth, maybe with a little oil. But the scent of birth, that raw biological musk, remained on the child. And for the mother, the ordeal wasn't over. She entered a period called churching. A woman who had just given birth was considered spiritually and physically unclean. For 40 days, she stayed indoors, often in that same dark room, recovering in isolation with the baby. It was a spiritual tradition, but it also acted as a kind of accidental quarantine. But imagine the air in that room. Day 1, day 10, day 30. The windows are still closed. The linens are soiled. Postpartum bleeding lasted for weeks. There were no disposable pads, just wadded linen, moss, or sheep's wool. The room smells of milk, of unwashed bodies, of healing wounds. Midwives might use wine or vinegar to clean the mother. Imagine the smell of sharp red wine mixed with the humid, stale air of a room that hasn't exhaled in a month. You stand in the corner of this room. You feel the intensity of life and death hovering together. It isn't a pleasant smell. It is heavy. It is overwhelming. But it is the smell of survival. It is the scent of a beginning in a world that was very hard to survive. And now we descend into the darkness. We leave the cycle of life and enter the cycle of death. The chapter of history that rewrote the sensory landscape forever. The Black Death. One day, you are worried about the smell of the tanneries. You are complaining about the fish market. The next, the world goes silent. The shouting stops. The hammers stop. The only sound is the tolling of church bells. But forget the bodies for a second. Let's talk about the atmosphere. Let's talk about what the plague smelled like. Because it wasn't just terrifying, it was putrid. You walk into a plague-struck town. The air feels different. It is thick, humid, even if it is the middle of winter. It seems to cling to your skin. It seems to crawl into your hair and settle under your fingernails. It is a blend of sweat, decay, mildew, blood, and vomit. But there is something else, something specific to this disease. The breath. The breath of the victims carried a sickly, sweet odor. One chronicler compared it to rotting apples. Others said it smelled like something boiled in bile. It was a smell that was almost fruity, but in a nauseating, fermented way. It was the smell of the body breaking down while it was still alive. The smell of gangrene. The smell of internal hemorrhage. And then the graves. They couldn't dig them fast enough. The cemeteries filled up. Then they dug trenches. Bodies were heaped like logs, layer upon layer. They covered them in lime, calcium oxide, to speed up decomposition and mask the smell. then dirt, then more bodies. The chemical burn of the lime mixed with the organic rot. The scent of death was so strong it overpowered even the spices people stuffed into their noses. People were desperate. They walked around holding oranges pierced with cloves up to their faces. They lit huge fires in the streets. They burned barrels of pitch and tar. They believed the smoke would purify the air. So the town smelled of burning tar and rotten apples. And then the desperate cures. Some doctors believe that like cures like, or that a strong smell could drive out a bad smell. Some recommended keeping a goat in your house, because the smell of the goat dung was so strong it might draw out the plague vapors. Others recommended inhaling the fumes of a latrine. Imagine being so terrified of death that you willingly sit and breathe in the scent of a toilet, hoping it will save you. And finally, you see him, the plague doctor. The figure in the long, dark, waxed robe, the wide-brimmed hat, and the mask, that terrified leather beak. It looks like a goth toucan auditioning for a nightmare. But that beak had a purpose. It wasn't just for show. It was an air filter. The beak was hollow. It was stuffed with herbs, dried flowers, spices, vinegar-soaked sponges. The doctor breathed through this potpourri. They believed that if they couldn't smell the disease, the miasma, they wouldn't catch it. They were walking air purifiers. You stand in the street. You watch the doctor pass. You smell the smoke of burning bedding from a nearby house. You smell the lime from the pits. You smell the sweet, cloying rot on the wind. You realize that this is what the end of the world smells like. Not dramatic, not fiery. So we have walked through the sewers. We have stood in the steam of the bathhouse. We have walked through the death-smelling engine rooms of the markets and the tanneries. We have smelled the plague. And as you lie there in the dark, you are probably asking yourself one question. How? How did they stand it? How did they not lose their minds? How did they kiss? How did they eat? How did they breathe without gagging every single second of the day? The answer is simple, and in a way, it is the most terrifying part of the whole story. They didn't mind, or at least, they didn't act like it. Welcome to the great medieval phenomenon of olfactory fatigue, or as we call it today, nose blindness. You see, their noses weren't physiologically different from yours. They had the same olfactory receptors. They had the same neurological wiring connecting their nose to their brain. But the brain is an adaptive machine. It is designed to ignore the constant to focus on the new. A baby born into this world. A baby born in that smoky, sealed cottage we visited. From the moment they take their first breath, they are inhaling smoke, animals, and unwashed wool. That is their baseline. That is their 0 point. That is what air smells like to them. By the time they are 6, they have watched animals defecate in the street. They have helped scrub blood off a butcher's table. They have stepped over decomposing refuse without a second thought. By the time they are 16, they carry their own unique odor portfolio: sweat, smoke, sheep, and last Tuesday's stew. Your nose, transported freshly from the 21st century, would mutiny.
It would send panic signals to your brain saying, danger, rot, filth. But their noses surrendered long ago. The smell became background noise, like the hum of traffic to a city dweller today. You hear it, but you don't hear it. They smelled it, but they didn't smell it. It took a lot to break through that barrier. They only noticed smells when they changed, when they became truly extraordinary. A strange new smell might mean witchcraft. It might mean a gas leak in a mine. It might mean a dead body was hidden nearby. But the everyday stench of the street, that was just life. In the summer, it got worse. The chroniclers called it the reeking time. The sun baked the waste in the streets until the effluvia rose like a ghost. The heat made the air shimmer with biological activity. But even then, they just shrugged. They breathed through their mouths. They carried on. Nose equilibrium is the only reason medieval life was psychologically bearable. They won against the stink not by cleaning it up, but by ignoring it, by letting their brain wave a white flag and adjust the dial down to tolerate. So, when you look at old paintings of medieval crowds and they look serene, remember that they are standing in a cloud of odor that would knock you unconscious. They have adapted, and honestly, that resilience is a kind of superpower. And now, the day is done. You have survived the sensory gauntlet. You have walked the city. You have worked the fields. You have avoided the bathhouse. You have dodged the contents of a chamber pot. It is time to go home. You kick off your shoes, those thin leather things crusted with weeks of mystery muck. You crawl into bed. But the bed is not empty. Your mattress is alive. It is a sack stuffed with straw. It has been there for ages. It is compressed into a lumpy, grimy mat. It smells of sweat. It smells of animal dander. It smells of the long, slow decay of dried grass. And it has residents. They called them companions, or hitchers. Fleas, lice, bed bugs. They weren't pests in the modern sense where you would call an exterminator. They were just part of the bedding ecosystem. Lice crawled through your hair. Fleas leapt between bodies like tiny circus performers. Bed bugs nestled deep in the creases of the mattress, waiting for you to exhale so they could find you. You didn't fight these creatures. You tolerated them. You lie down. You scratch your scalp, you scratch your ankle. You pull the rough wool blanket up to your chin. It smells of the sheep it came from, lanolin and dust. It scratches your skin, but it holds the heat. The room is cold. There is no insulation. The dampness creeps in through the gaps in the wall. Under the bed, the chamber pot sits. You used it earlier. It adds a faint, sharp note of ammonia to the night air. But you don't move it. Who wants to walk to the latrine in the freezing dark? You lie there. You listen to the breathing of your family. You share their warmth. You hear the goat shifting in the corner, chewing quietly. Your nose begins to forget the smells. The stale air, the old sweat, the faint barnyard aroma of your bedding. They blur together into something that feels safe. This is home. You drift into what they called first sleep. In the darkness, the world fades. The smell fades. The scratching fades. And in that strange, flea-bitten limbo between waking and sleep,
you realize that you have made it through another day in the most pungent era of human history. This is what bedtime smells like. Not lavender, not fresh laundry, but existence. So here we are, at the end of our long, pungent journey through the murky mist of medieval hygiene. If your senses haven't completely shut down in self-defense, congratulations, you are stronger than most. You have braved the fumes of unwashed bodies. You have tasted the tang of spoiled meat stews. You have smelled the herbal desperation of the plague doctor. You have learned that cleanliness wasn't a given. It was a luxury, a risk, a suspicion. But for all the grime and odor, there is something oddly comforting in the resilience of these people. They lived, they loved, they built cathedrals that touched the sky. They composed poetry. They raised children, often in the same rooms where animals slept and laundry died slow, musty deaths. They feared the air, yet they breathed it. They feared the water, yet they drank it. They adapted. They pushed forward despite the stink. And now it is time for you to leave them there. Let the image of the muddy street fade away. Let the smell of the smoke and the incense drift out of your mind. Bring yourself back to the present. Feel the sheets against your skin. They are smooth. They are clean. They smell of nothing but comfort. Smell the air in your room. It is fresh. It is light. It is filtered. Take a moment to appreciate the little things. Your toothbrush, your soap, your shower, your toilet with plumbing that goes somewhere far, far away. You are safe here. You are clean. The medieval world is gone. It is just a story now, a ghost of a scent caught in the pages of history. Let your body sink into the mattress. Let your breath slow down. Inhale the peace of the present moment. Exhale the dusk of the past. You are drifting. You are floating. You are clean. And if you dream of medieval times tonight, try not to breathe too deeply. Good night.